It is past midnight at a boat ramp on the Suwannee River, and a man is standing over a cooler that will not close. The fish inside came out of a deep hole in the dark that afternoon after a thunderstorm pushed him off the water and then let him back on. He grew up on this river. His father fished it, and his father before that, and the family story had always been the same one every river family tells itself, that somewhere in the deepest bends there are fish nobody has ever put a hand on. That winter, he and his father had started taking the story seriously. They talked about how the river had never once gone dry in living memory, never been drained or emptied, which meant that whatever was down in the deep holes had been down there the whole time, uninterrupted, for as long as the water had run. So he went looking. He runs a shallow John boat with no fancy electronics, no forward-facing sonar, nothing that paints a picture of the bottom. He found the deep holes the old way, dropping an anchor line over the side and reading the depth off the rope, hole by hole, bend by bend, a season of patience spent learning where the river floor falls away into the dark. Over 4 days that February, before the record, he and his father pulled 10 blue catfish out of those holes, fish up to 30 pounds, good fish, the kind that would make anyone's week. But that was not what they were after. They were mapping. They were finding the deepest water and learning what lived at the bottom of it. And then he came back with a friend, caught some bream for bait in the morning, waited out the midday storm, and put a line down into the deepest hole he had found. When it hit, he knew immediately it was not one of the 30-pounders. He told his friend it was either a sturgeon or a catfish, and whatever it was big. It took everything the rod had to bring it up out of the pressure and the cold and the black. They tried to keep it alive in the water at the ramp, hoping to release it. Then they learned a record fish has to be inspected by a state biologist, which meant the fish was going to die no matter what they did. And so they put it in the only thing that would hold it, a 120-quart cooler, and even then it barely fit. Its body wide as the cooler was wide, its tail curled against the plastic because there was nowhere else for it to go. When the officer arrives near midnight and they weigh it on a certified scale at a nearby seafood market, the number is 73.6 pounds, 48.5 inches long, a girth of nearly 37 inches, the reach of a grown man's arms around a barrel. It is the largest blue catfish ever recorded in the state of Florida. It breaks a record that had stood for 11 years. And here's the part that should stop you. Every biologist who looks at it agrees on one thing, and it is not that this is a big fish. It is that this is not the biggest one down there. So this is the question the river will not answer. How large is the fish still sitting in the hole this one came out of? And why, in these particular southern rivers, are the catfish turning into something no record ever predicted? Let me tell you what we actually know. Start with the animal in the cooler, because the size is not an accident and it is not a fluke. The blue catfish is the largest catfish species in North America. Not the largest fish. The largest catfish. And a big one does not look like the channel cats people pull off a dock on a summer evening. It is slate blue across the back, fading to a white belly, thick through the shoulders, with a deeply forked tail built to move a body that can outweigh the person holding the rod. The all-tackle world record, certified by the International Game Fish Association, is a fish that weighed 143 pounds. It came out of a reservoir on the Virginia and North Carolina line in 2011, and it measured 57 inches. And the man who caught it tried to keep it alive in a tank and it died inside a day, because a fish that old and that large does not survive being pulled up out of the pressure and the cold and the dark it has spent its whole life inside. That is the ceiling nobody in Florida thought applied to Florida, because the 73-pound fish on the Suwannee did not just break the old state record, it ended a comfortable idea that had lasted more than a decade. The previous Florida record was a fish of 69.5 pounds, caught back in 2015 on a different river in the Panhandle. For 11 years, that number sat at the top of the list, and for 11 years it was easy to read it as a limit. 69 pounds once on one river in one lucky season. That was the story. That was about as big as these fish got here. The Panhandle had a couple of monsters everybody knew, and the rest of the state's rivers held nothing you needed to think twice about. The problem with that story is where the blue catfish comes from and how it got into the Suwannee in the first place. This fish is not native to most of the water it now lives in. Its true home is the great interior river systems of the continent: the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, the Rio Grande, the muddy arteries that drain the middle of the country. That is where it evolved. That is where it belongs. Everywhere else it was brought. According to the Federal Fisheries Agency, blue catfish have been stocked as a sport fish in nearly 20 states, dropped into rivers and reservoirs on purpose by people who wanted a big, strong fish on the end of a line and did not fully understand what they were letting loose. And by the way, before we go any further, I want to know where you're listening from tonight and whether the water near you holds a fish like this one. Leave it in the comments. There is a river near almost everyone, and almost none of them are as empty as they look. Now, if you want to know what happens when you put this fish somewhere it did not evolve, you do not have to guess. There is a place that ran the whole experiment, decades ahead of Florida, and the results are on the record: the Chesapeake Bay. In the 1970s, wildlife managers in Virginia decided to build anglers a new trophy fishery. The striped bass were in decline, and the blue catfish had a reputation down in the southern states as a hard-fighting prize. So the plan was simple: introduce them. In 1974 alone, roughly 300,000 blue catfish went into the James and the Rappahannock rivers, and the stocking continued through the mid-1980s. It was, as one account put it, a well-intended plan. The fish were freshwater fish. Everyone assumed they would stay politely in the rivers where they were placed. They did not stay. It turned out the blue catfish could tolerate brackish water, saltier water than anyone expected. A study out of the region found that it takes a high level of salinity, saltier than most of the bay ever gets, to stop one of these fish from moving through it. Which means the bay was never a wall. It was a highway. The fish slid out of one river, into the wider bay, and up into the next river, and people moved them too, bucket by bucket, into new water. And in the bay they found something their native rivers never gave them. No natural enemy. Nothing above them. An osprey or a bald eagle will take a small one off the surface, and a person will take one on a line, but a grown blue catfish in the Chesapeake has no predator at all. It sits at the very top. What happens next is the part that should change how you look at that quiet river behind your house. The population did not grow, it exploded. Today, the estimate for the Chesapeake is more than 100 million blue catfish. In some of the bay's rivers, scientists now believe these fish make up as much as 75% of the total weight of all fish in the water. 3 out of every 4 pounds of fish, a species that was not there 50 years ago. Researchers who cut them open described finding 20, 30, 40 blue crabs in a single stomach. They eat the crabs, the menhaden, the shad, the river herring, the young of the native fish, the eggs, the shellfish on the bottom. One ecologist put it as plainly as it can be put. The problem is that they eat everything. And everything reaches further up the chain than crabs. The federal managers list Atlantic sturgeon among the prey. The Atlantic sturgeon is a fish that has been on this earth, in more or less its current form, since long before the continents finished moving, a living relic that outlasted the dinosaurs, and is now so rare it is federally protected. And it turns up in the stomachs of a fish that was dropped into the bay in the 1970s for weekend anglers. That is the reversal in a single image. The ancient survivor, eaten by the newcomer, nobody was watching. The damage does not stop at the fish, either. Follow one thread. The blue catfish eat menhaden by the ton, the small, oily bait fish that half the bay depends on. And in recent years, the osprey of the Chesapeake, the fishhawks that nest along every shoreline, have been failing to raise their young, and researchers have tied that failure to the collapse of the menhaden. The osprey need to feed their chicks. The catfish nobody could see, eating the bait fish nobody thinks about, starving the birds everybody loves. That is how a food web comes apart, not with a bang. Quietly from the bottom, in a place that still looks, from a boat on a Sunday, exactly like it always did. By the time the bay understood what it had, the only tool left was appetite. Virginia has now put $500,000 in grants toward building out a commercial blue catfish fishery, paying watermen to pull the invader out by the boatload, because unlike almost everything else in those waters, the blue catfish can be harvested nearly year-round with no limit. Restaurants have put it on the menu, marketing it as a mild white fish, one chain's manager saying it cooks up with more flavor than chicken. The federal government inspects the fillets so families will trust them. An entire region is trying, plate by plate, to eat its way back out of a decision it made 50 years ago. And it is not winning. It is holding, at best, against a fish that breeds faster than anyone can fork it up. That is the animal now living in Florida's rivers. Not a bigger base, not a novelty for the record book, the same fish that ate a bay. And this is where the comfortable Florida story starts to come apart, because if you have followed me this far, you already feel the floor tilting. If the fish that took over the Chesapeake is the same fish now setting records on the Suwannee, then 69 pounds was never a ceiling. It was an early number. It was the size these fish reach before the water has finished with them. If you find yourself wanting to know how this ends, that curiosity is the reason to follow along, because these are exactly the stories this channel exists to chase. The ones hiding in the water we think we already know. But before the ending, you need to understand how a fish this large hunts a river you cannot see the bottom of, because the Suwannee is a Blackwater river. More than 200 miles of it, running down out of the swamps of South Georgia into Florida, stain the color of strong tea by the tannins leaching out of the cypress and the peat. Stand on the bank and look down, and the water gives you back nothing. A foot of visibility, sometimes less. Down where the big fish live, in the deep holes the record hunter was plumbing with his anchor rope, there is no light at all. It is a world run entirely by touch and by chemistry, and the blue catfish is built to own it. Here is the thing almost nobody knows about a catfish. A catfish tastes with its entire body. Not just its mouth, its skin, its fins, its whiskers, the long barbels around its jaw. The whole surface of the animal is studded with taste receptors, so densely that scientists have a name for what a catfish essentially is. A swimming tongue, where a human being carries somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 taste buds, all of them crowded onto the tongue. A single catfish carries an estimated 100,000 to 175,000 of them, spread across every inch of its skin. And these are not blunt instruments. The researchers who mapped the system found taste cells tuned to specific compounds, to the amino acids that leak out of living tissue and dying tissue and open wounds, able to register them in trace amounts, a few molecules dissolved into a huge dark volume of moving water. The densest cluster of all sites on the barbels, the whiskers, which the fish sweeps ahead of itself through the murk like a blind man's hands, reading the water before its body arrives. It does not need to see its prey. It does not need to touch its prey. It can taste a wounded fish, or a dying crab, or a scent trail. And because the receptors run down both sides of its body, it can feel which side the scent is stronger on and turn and follow the gradient to the source. Think about what that means in a river you cannot see through. The black water that blinds you is not blinding the catfish. It is the catfish's whole advantage. Down in the dark, that fish is reading the water the way you read a lit room. It knows what died upstream. It knows what is bleeding. And it knows the moment your foot breaks the surface, long before you know anything is near you. If you have ever swum in a Florida river on a summer afternoon and felt, for no reason you could name, that something was aware of you, you were very likely right. It tasted you go by, and it decided you were too large to be food, and it let you pass, and you never knew it was there. Now put that sensory system together with the rest of the picture, and the mystery sharpens into something specific. You have a fish with no predator above it, a fish that can eat nearly anything and located in total darkness. A fish that grows for as long as it lives, and these fish can live 20 years, some of them considerably longer. Biologists looked at the 73-pound Suwannee fish and figured it had likely been down in that river for 30 years or more. 30 years growing, in a river people have fished their whole lives in holes nobody had ever properly touched. It was there when those anglers were children. It was there the whole time. It simply lived below the light, below the record, below the line of anything anyone thought to look for. And that is the real reversal. That is the answer that breaks the clean story. The reason nobody knows how big these fish are getting is not that the science is mysterious. Ask a biologist why a blue catfish in a warm, productive southern river with no natural enemy and endless prey would grow larger than the record books predict, and they will tell you exactly why. Nothing is stopping it. The water is warm nearly year-round, so it feeds nearly year-round. The prey is abundant, the predators are absent, the lifespan is long. Every condition that limits a fish has been removed. The mechanism is not a mystery at all. The mystery is that nobody has been measuring, because you cannot survey what you cannot see. These fish live on the bottom of rivers no light reaches, in the deepest holes, and they are caught almost by accident. By the rare angler stubborn enough to fish the way that Record Hunter fished, with an anchor and a rope and a season of patience. The 73-pound fish is not the biggest fish in the Suwannee. It is the biggest fish somebody happened to pull up out of the Suwannee. Those are not the same sentence. One is a record, the other is a mystery, and it leaves three possibilities on the table, and none of them is comfortable. The first possibility is the simplest and the hardest to sit with, that the Suwannee and rivers like it across North Florida are early. That what happened in the Chesapeake over 50 years is happening here now, quietly, on the bottom, and the 73-pound record is not a peak, but a milepost on the way up. If the same fish reached 143 pounds in a cooler reservoir up north, there is no biological reason it cannot reach numbers like that in a warm river that feeds it 12 months a year. The record we just celebrated may be a fish we look back on as small. The second possibility is about the river itself, and it is quieter and worse. That while everyone was watching for the trophy, the fish were doing to the Suwannee what they did to the Chesapeake. Eating down through the food web, taking the shellfish, the native catfish, the young of everything, the eggs, the base of the whole system, in a river that people still describe as pristine, still paddle on a Sunday, still let their children swim in. Nobody has run the study on the Suwannee that they ran on the bay, so nobody can tell you, tonight, how much of that river has already quietly changed hands. And if the Chesapeake is the map, the first thing to go is the thing nobody counts. The bait fish, the crabs, the small lives the whole river is built on top of. And the third possibility is the one that keeps the biologists honest, because it is simply that they do not know the ceiling. Nobody has located the upper limit of how large one of these fish can grow in this water, because the only way to find the limit is to catch the fish that defines it. And by definition, the biggest fish are the ones nobody has caught. They are down in the holes right now, older than the record, larger than the record, reading the Blackwater with 100,000 taste receptors, feeling the seasons turn, and growing. The largest blue catfish in the Suwannee River has never been seen by a human being. It has no number. It exists only as the empty space above the last one somebody found. Here is what the people whose job it is to know will actually tell you, if you ask them plainly. They do not know how many blue catfish are in the Suwannee. They do not know how large the largest ones are. They do not know how far up and down the river system the fish have spread, or how many other Florida rivers now hold them below the surface of anyone's attention. They know these fish were put into this state's water by people, decades ago, for sport. They know the fish tolerate salt better than anyone predicted, which is exactly how they crossed the Chesapeake from one river into every river, and the Gulf Coast of Florida is stitched together by the same kind of brackish seams. They know what these fish did to a bay 1,000 miles north when the same conditions lined up, and they know that certifying a state record is a very different thing from measuring a population, that the 73-pound fish told them a size is now possible here, and told them almost nothing about how many fish are approaching it in the dark. That is the whole shape of it. A confirmed record, a fish 30 years in the making, sitting on top of a question no agency has funded the answer to. So go back to the boat ramp. Past midnight, the cooler that will not close, the man standing over a fish his family always half believed was down there and never once managed to prove. He proved it. And in proving it, he opened the thing behind it, the space above the record, the unmeasured river, the deep holes that gave up one fish and kept the rest. Here is what this story is really about, and it is not the size of a fish. It is the gap. The gap between a river that looks tame and settled and known, a place you paddle on a bright afternoon and let your kids swim in, and the animal that has been quietly becoming the largest predator in it for 30 years without anyone measuring. These fish do not belong here. They were carried in, but they have been in these rivers longer than most of the people fishing over them, and they never agreed to stay in the shallows where anyone could count them, and they are still down there tonight. A blue catfish in the deepest hole on the Suwannee, tasting the current. Another in the Apalachicola. Another in a river nobody has thought to check. In the Blackwater, below the light, where the record is only the smallest of the giants and the rest are still growing, still feeding, still waiting. If you like this one, YouTube thinks you're going to like the video already on your screen. Go ahead and let it play.